The first thing I noticed was that the door handle wasn't moving normally. It would twitch, stop, then twitch again, barely enough to make a sound. I sat upright in bed, staring at the darkness of my dorm room while my heart hammered against my ribs. The red digits on my alarm clock read 2:47 a.m. The noise came again. A tiny metallic click. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to force the door. They were testing it. Patiently. Quietly. Like they didn't want anyone to know they were there. I slipped out of bed and crept toward the door. The hallway light leaked through the gap beneath it, casting a pale strip across the floor. Another click. I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. At first I thought nobody was there. Then I saw the top of a head. Someone was standing directly against the door. Motionless. Their face angled toward the floor. Waiting. I don't know why, but that scared me more than if they'd been pounding on the door. I grabbed my phone and called campus security. While I waited for someone to answer, the person outside never moved. Not once. Just stood there. Listening. Watching. Waiting. And the worst part? Deep down, I already knew who it was. 3 days earlier, I had arrived at university convinced it would be the best year of my life. My parents helped me carry boxes into the dorm before saying their goodbyes. The campus was packed with students laughing, taking photos, and exploring their new freedom. Everything felt normal, until my roommate arrived. His name was Owen. He showed up carrying a single duffel bag and an old backpack that looked years older than him. I introduced myself. He stared at my outstretched hand for several uncomfortable seconds before shaking it. Weakly, like he wasn't used to touching people. Then he sat on his bed and said nothing. I tried starting conversations. Where are you from? What are you studying? Excited to be here? Every answer was short. Cold. One-word responses followed by long stretches of silence. Within 20 minutes I found myself pretending to scroll through my phone just to avoid the awkwardness. That night I left to explore campus with a few people I'd met during orientation. When I returned hours later, Owen was sitting exactly where I'd left him. Same position. Same expression. His laptop illuminated one side of his face while the other remained hidden in shadow. Something about that image stayed with me. I couldn't explain why. But for the first time since arriving on campus, I felt uneasy. As if I'd missed something important. And later that night, I would wake up and discover that the feeling wasn't paranoia. Someone really had been watching me. For much longer than I realized. I woke up sometime after 3 in the morning. At first, I didn't know why. The room was silent. No footsteps. No voices from the hallway. No typing from Owen's laptop. Just silence. Then I noticed the moonlight. The blinds had been opened. Pale silver light spilled across the room, illuminating the desks, the walls, and the empty floor between our beds. I rolled over and froze. Owen was sitting on the edge of his mattress, facing me, completely still. For a second, I thought he might be asleep. Then I realized his eyes were open, staring directly at me. A chill crawled through my chest. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The room felt unnaturally quiet, as though even the building itself was holding its breath. Finally, I managed to whisper, "What are you doing?" Owen blinked. His expression didn't change. "Sorry." That was all he said. One word. Then he slowly lowered himself back onto the bed and turned away, as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Owen was already gone when I woke up. For the first time since moving in, his bed was empty. Honestly, I was relieved. I spent most of the day attending orientation events and trying to make friends. The campus felt different in daylight. Normal. Safe. I almost convinced myself the previous night had been some strange misunderstanding. Then I saw him. Our orientation group was passing through a garden area behind one of the academic buildings when a few students ahead of me suddenly stopped walking. "What is that guy doing?" I followed their gaze. At first I couldn't find what they were looking at. Then I noticed someone sitting deep inside a cluster of bushes. It was Owen. He wasn't hiding. At least, not exactly. He was sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside a large tree. His hands slowly moved across the bark. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like he was feeling every crack in the wood. He never looked up. Never acknowledged the dozens of students passing nearby. The scene lasted only a few seconds before our group continued walking. But it left an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Later, I mentioned that he was my roommate. The students I'd met exchanged looks. One of them laughed nervously. Another simply said, Good luck with that. For the first time, I wondered if other people felt the same uneasiness I did. That evening I stayed out longer than usual. Anything felt better than sitting alone in that dorm room. But eventually I had to return. When I opened the door, Owen was sitting in a chair facing the entrance, waiting. The room was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen. For some reason, it felt like he had been sitting there for hours, doing nothing, just waiting. I tried to ignore it. I sat down at my desk and opened my computer. That's when my stomach dropped. Several folders were open. Private folders. Emails I hadn't read yet were marked as opened. Files were arranged differently than I remembered. Someone had been using my laptop, and there was only one other person who could have done it. Slowly, I turned toward Owen. "Did you go through my computer?" The answer came instantly. Too instantly. "No." His voice was sharp, defensive, like he'd prepared the response before I even asked. I stared at him, and for the first time, I realized something that genuinely frightened me. It wasn't that Owen was socially awkward. It wasn't that he was strange. It was the feeling that he was becoming interested in me. Far too interested. And I was about to discover how far that obsession had already gone. That night, I decided to lock everything. My laptop, my backpack, even the small drawer beside my bed. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had forgotten which files I'd opened. Maybe I had moved my belongings myself and simply didn't remember. But deep down, I knew better. The feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Someone had been touching my things, and I knew exactly who. I stayed awake longer than usual, pretending to watch videos on my phone while keeping an eye on Owen. He barely moved. Hours passed. The room remained silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Eventually exhaustion won. I fell asleep. Then came the sound. A zipper. Slowly opening. My eyes snapped open. For a moment I didn't move. The room was dark. The sound came again. Closer this time. I reached for the lamp beside my bed and switched it on. The light flooded the room. Owen was kneeling on the floor, directly beside my backpack. His hand was still resting on the zipper. For a split second neither of us said anything. Neither of us moved. Then he calmly looked up at me. No panic. No embarrassment. Nothing. Just those blank eyes staring back. "What are you doing?" I demanded. A long silence followed. Then he spoke. "I think you took my toothbrush." The answer was so ridiculous that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, a wave of cold anger rushed through me. My backpack was half open. My clothes had been pulled aside. There was absolutely no chance he was searching for a toothbrush. He knew it. I knew it. Yet he continued staring at me as if the explanation made perfect sense. That was the moment I stopped trying to understand him. Something was wrong. Seriously wrong. The following day I filed a request for a room change. Fortunately, the housing office had an available space in another dorm building. By late afternoon I had packed everything. I didn't even tell Owen I was leaving. Part of me didn't want a confrontation. The other part simply wanted distance. As much distance as possible. My new roommate was quiet but normal. We talked about classes, movies, sports, regular things. For the first time all week, I felt myself relax. That night we turned off the lights around midnight. The room fell silent, and I finally believed the nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. A strange noise woke me sometime later. Click. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. Click. A tiny metallic sound. Barely noticeable. At first I thought it was part of a dream. Then I heard it again. Click. My blood turned cold. I sat upright and listened. The sound was coming from outside our room. Not from the hallway. From our door. Slowly, I climbed out of bed and moved toward it. Another click. This time I recognized it immediately. The doorknob. Someone was testing the handle. Very gently. As if trying not to make noise. I pressed my eye against the peephole. And instantly wished I hadn't. Standing on the other side was a figure. Motionless. Head lowered. Face hidden. Waiting. The hallway light illuminated just enough for me to recognize the clothing. The same dark hoodie. The same worn sneakers. The same posture. Owen. My former roommate. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't speaking. He was simply standing outside my new room in the middle of the night. Slowly turning the handle. Over and over again. As if checking whether I had remembered to lock it. My hands started shaking. I reached for my phone and dialed campus police, keeping my eyes fixed on the peephole. The dispatcher answered. I whispered my location, then looked back at the door. The figure was gone. For one brief second, relief washed over me, until I heard a soft sound directly behind the door. A whisper. So quiet I almost thought I imagined it. Almost. Because I was certain it said my name. The sound came from somewhere beyond the firelight. A single crack, like a heavy boot snapping a branch. 3 of us stopped laughing at the exact same time. The woods went silent. Not normal silence. The kind that feels like something is listening. I remember staring beyond the orange glow of the fire into the darkness surrounding our campsite. The trees seemed endless out there, black trunks disappearing into deeper blackness. Nobody spoke. Another crunch echoed through the woods. Closer. Much closer. And suddenly being alone in the forest at midnight didn't seem nearly as fun as it had an hour earlier. The strange part was that this spot wasn't easy to find. You had to know where you were going. Most students never ventured this deep into the preserve after dark, which meant whoever was out there probably wasn't lost. They were looking for something. Or someone. 3 nights earlier, none of us had planned anything exciting. Classes had been stressful. Midterms were approaching. We wanted an excuse to get away from campus for a few hours. So we packed a backpack full of cheap beer and headed toward a clearing beside the lake. It was our unofficial escape spot. Hidden from security. Hidden from other students. Hidden from almost everyone. By the time we arrived, the sun had already disappeared behind the trees. The water reflected the moonlight like polished glass. For a while everything felt perfect. We built a small fire, opened a few drinks, talked about classes, relationships, and all the stupid things college students talk about when they think they're invincible. Hours passed. The fire crackled softly. The alcohol made us louder. Fun turned into uncontrollable laughter. At one point, Ryan fell backward into a pile of leaves because he was laughing so hard. That's when Jake suddenly raised a hand. Wait, his smile vanished. We listened. The forest listened with us. Crunch. A slow footstep somewhere beyond the trees. Ryan immediately sat up. Nobody laughed this time. The sound came again. A deliberate step. Then another. Circling. Not approaching directly. Not leaving either. Just moving around us. The fire that had felt comforting moments ago suddenly made us feel exposed. Visible. Like a spotlight in the middle of the woods. I remember glancing into the darkness and getting the uncomfortable feeling that someone was standing just beyond the tree line. Watching. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Then something exploded out of the darkness. A thick tree branch crashed directly into the center of our campfire. Sparks erupted into the air. All 3 of us jumped to our feet. And somewhere in the woods beyond the firelight, someone started running toward us. For half a second, nobody moved. The branch still smoldered in the center of the fire. Sparks drifted upward through the darkness. Then instinct took over. Ryan bolted first. 1 second he was standing beside us. The next he was sprinting into the trees without saying a word. His footsteps disappeared almost immediately. Jake and I remained frozen. Not because we were brave. Because our brains hadn't fully processed what had just happened. Someone had thrown that branch. Not dropped it. Not kicked it. Thrown it. Hard. Directly into our campsite. I remember staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, waiting to see a face emerge between the trees. Nothing. Just shadows. The kind that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. "Let's go," Jake whispered. His voice sounded different. Shaky. Afraid. I grabbed the backpack containing the remaining drinks. The moment I did, another object flew out of the darkness. This time it wasn't aimed at the fire. It was aimed at us. The branch struck Jake across the side of his face with a loud crack. He screamed and stumbled backward. For a second I thought his jaw had broken. The impact was that hard. "Run!" I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the trail. Neither of us looked back. Branches whipped against our faces as we sprinted through the woods. Dead leaves exploded beneath our shoes. The darkness felt endless. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound felt too close. Behind us, something moved. Fast. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Keeping pace with us through the trees. Not gaining ground. Not falling behind. Just following. The realization sent pure panic through my body. Whoever had attacked us wasn't trying to scare us away. They were chasing us. The trail finally opened onto the road separating the preserve from campus. Jake nearly collapsed as we stumbled onto the pavement. Both of us were gasping for air. For a moment neither of us spoke. We just listened. Silence. The woods stood motionless across the road. Dark. Still. Empty. Then a shape appeared between the trees. My stomach dropped. Someone was standing there, watching us. The distance and darkness hid their features. All I could make out was a tall silhouette, completely motionless. We didn't wait to see what happened next. We ran. By the time we reached our dorm building, Ryan was already inside. When we burst into his room, he looked almost as terrified as we felt. Together we rushed to the window overlooking the preserve. The woods were visible in the distance, and standing near the edge of the tree line was the same figure, pacing slowly back and forth. Every time headlights from a passing car swept across the area, the figure stepped backward into the shadows, then emerged again once the light disappeared. Watching, waiting. For nearly 10 minutes, none of us said a word. Eventually the figure stopped pacing, turned, and disappeared into the forest. The next morning, after the alcohol had worn off and reality settled in, we all realized the same thing. Whoever had been out there knew exactly where we were. And somehow, they had reached us without making a sound. What none of us knew at the time was that the preserve had a history that would make that night feel far less random, and far more disturbing. The next day, none of us wanted to talk about it. At least not seriously. That's what people do when something scares them more than they want to admit. We laughed, made jokes, called the figure a homeless guy, a prankster, or some drunk student messing around in the woods. But every joke felt forced. Every laugh ended too quickly. Because deep down, we all knew something wasn't right. Jake still had a dark bruise spreading across the side of his face where the branch had struck him. That wasn't a prank. Someone had intentionally thrown it, hard enough to cause real damage. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I started asking around campus. At first nobody knew anything. Then one evening, while talking to an older student who had worked maintenance near the preserve, I mentioned the clearing by the lake. His expression changed immediately. "Why were you out there at night?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed and told him we were just hanging out. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he stared toward the window for a moment, then said something that stayed with me. "People keep reporting strange things out there." I asked what kind of things. He shrugged. "Footsteps, someone watching from the trees, campsites getting destroyed, missing backpacks." I waited for him to smile, to admit he was joking. He never did. Before leaving, he added one final detail. According to him, security had received similar reports for years. Nobody had ever identified who was responsible. No arrests. No names. Nothing. Just stories. That should have been enough to keep us away. And honestly, it was. For the rest of the semester, none of us returned to the preserve after dark. Not once. But the story wasn't over. About 3 weeks later, Ryan called me around midnight. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. He sounded terrified. "I think someone's outside." I sat upright. "What?" "I'm serious." There was panic in his voice now. "He keeps walking past my window." Ryan lived on the first floor. His room faced a wooded section near the edge of campus. I immediately headed over. When I arrived, Jake was already there. The three of us stood in silence, staring through the blinds. At first we saw nothing. Then movement. A figure emerged between the trees. Tall, thin, the same build, the same posture, slowly walking across the edge of the property. Not looking at the building, not trying to hide, just walking, as if they knew we'd see them. The figure disappeared behind a row of trees. Several minutes passed. Nothing. Then a soft sound came from outside. Tap. We all froze. Tap. Tap. The window. Something was tapping on the glass. Very gently. Ryan's face turned white. The tapping continued. Slow. Patient. Almost playful. None of us moved. None of us spoke. Finally, Jake stepped forward and yanked the blinds open. The tapping stopped instantly. Outside, the ground was empty. No person. No movement. Nothing. Just darkness. Then Ryan pointed downward. My heart nearly stopped. In the dirt directly beneath the window was a large tree branch. Freshly broken. Placed carefully beneath the glass. Not thrown. Not dropped. Placed. As if someone wanted us to recognize it. As if someone wanted us to remember. We reported everything to campus security. Nothing came of it. No cameras captured anyone. No witnesses saw anything. No evidence was ever found. Eventually graduation came. Life moved on. Years have passed since then. Yet sometimes, late at night, I still think about that figure standing beyond the firelight, watching us from the trees, following us through the woods, appearing outside Ryan's window weeks later. And the part that still bothers me most isn't that we never found out who it was. It's that whoever it was always seemed to know exactly where we were. The first knock was so quiet I thought it came from inside my head. Tap. I looked up from my biology notes and stared at the door. The room was silent again. Outside my window, rain tapped softly against the glass. The dorm floor was unusually quiet for a Thursday night. Most students were either studying or somewhere else on campus. A minute passed. Then it came again. Tap. This time I was sure. Someone was at my door. Come in, I called without looking up. Nothing happened. No handle turning. No footsteps. Just silence. Eventually I stood up and opened the door. The small corridor outside my room was empty. I stepped out and looked around the corner into the main hallway. Nobody. Not a single person. I shrugged it off and returned to studying. At the time, it felt harmless. A random prank. Something forgettable. I wish that had been true. The following night, the knocking returned. Only this time it wasn't gentle. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the room. Bang, bang, bang. I immediately sat upright in bed. The clock read 12:41 a.m. Who is it? I called. No answer. The knocking stopped. I opened the door so quickly that it slammed against the wall. Again, nobody was there. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. The corridor stood empty. Every door remained closed. Every room appeared asleep. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. The kind of feeling you get when something isn't adding up. The next morning I asked several people on my floor if they were messing with me. Every one of them denied it. And surprisingly, they seemed genuine. A few even laughed and said nobody would bother walking all the way to my isolated corner of the dorm just to play a prank. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because if it wasn't them, then who was it? The answer never came. But 3 nights later, things escalated. I woke suddenly to violent knocking. Not tapping, not pounding. Almost frantic. The sound exploded through the room. My heart nearly stopped. For several seconds I lay frozen beneath my blanket listening. The knocking continued. Whoever stood outside sounded desperate to get my attention. Or desperate for me to open the door. I finally forced myself out of bed. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, the knocking stopped. Complete silence. I opened the door. Nothing. But this time, as I stepped into the corridor, I caught movement. A dark figure disappearing around the far corner of the hallway. I ran. Every instinct told me not to, but I ran anyway. The figure vanished around another corner near the communal bathroom. I reached it seconds later. The bathroom door was swinging shut. Someone had definitely entered. Breathing hard, I pushed the door open. The lights were off. The room was empty. At least that's what I thought. Then I noticed the stalls. Both doors were closed. I crouched down and looked underneath. Inside one stall sat a pair of large black work boots. Completely still. Someone was obviously inside. I swallowed hard and slowly approached. Then I grabbed the stall door and yanked it open. The stall was empty. No person. No movement. Nothing. Just the boots sitting neatly on the floor. As if someone had stepped out of them and vanished. Then a sound drifted through the bathroom. A low, raspy laugh. Not close. Not far away. Somewhere inside the building. And for the first time since arriving at college, I felt genuinely afraid. I ran out of that bathroom so fast I nearly slipped on the wet tile. The laughter followed me. Not loudly. Not chasing me. Just lingering somewhere behind me like an echo. By the time I reached my room, my hands were shaking. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed my desk chair against the handle. It sounds ridiculous now. A cheap dorm chair wasn't stopping anybody. But at 2 in the morning, after finding an empty pair of boots inside a locked bathroom stall, logic wasn't exactly my strongest asset. I climbed into bed and grabbed my phone. Every friend I messaged was asleep. The little delivered notifications appeared one after another. No replies. Outside my room, the hallway remained silent. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. I started convincing myself that I'd imagined part of it. Maybe somebody had slipped out while the lights were off. Maybe the laughter came from another floor. Maybe exhaustion was making everything seem worse than it really was. Then the knocking returned. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 The sound came from the other side of my door. I froze. My eyes locked onto the handle. The knocking continued. Not aggressive. Not impatient. Almost polite. As though whoever stood outside knew I was awake. Knew I was listening. And was waiting for me to answer. The chair against the door suddenly felt useless. The knocking lasted nearly 30 seconds before finally stopping. No footsteps followed. No voices. Just silence. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I spoke with almost everyone on my floor. Nobody admitted to pranking me. More importantly, nobody had heard the knocking. That made no sense. My room wasn't soundproof. The previous night's pounding should have woken half the hallway. Yet every student I asked gave me the same confused look. One guy even laughed and said I was probably having stress dreams from studying too much. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But later that afternoon, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. When I returned from class, there was a small piece of paper lying on the floor beneath my door. No envelope. No name. Just a folded note. At first I assumed it was some club advertisement. The campus was full of them. But when I unfolded it, there were only 4 words written in shaky handwriting. "Why don't you answer?" I stared at the message for several seconds. My pulse quickened. Nobody should have known about the knocking. I hadn't told anyone except a few friends. Yet someone clearly knew. Someone who wanted me to know they were still there. Watching. Waiting. And that night, for the first time, I noticed something standing at the far end of the hallway. A tall figure. Completely motionless. Looking directly toward my room. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just another student. Someone waiting for a friend. Someone checking their phone. Someone normal. But the longer I stared down the hallway, the less normal it seemed. The figure wasn't moving. Not shifting its weight. Not looking around. Just standing there. Facing my room. Watching. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly, casting brief shadows across the corridor. Every time the lights dimmed, I expected the figure to disappear. It never did. I blinked. Looked away for half a second. When I looked back, the hallway was empty. My stomach tightened. There had been no footsteps. No doors opening. Nothing. 1 second the figure was there. The next it wasn't. I quickly locked my door and stayed inside for the rest of the evening. As darkness settled outside, the atmosphere on the floor changed. Students returned from classes. Conversations echoed through the hall, and for a while I felt safe again. The noise of other people helped. It made everything feel normal. Until around midnight. That's when I heard it. A single knock. Not on my door. On the wall beside my bed. I sat upright instantly. Knock. The sound came again. Slow. Deliberate. From inside the wall itself. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then, scratch. A faint scraping noise traveled through the drywall. My pulse quickened. The sound moved slowly downward before stopping completely. I didn't know what to think. Maybe old pipes. Maybe the building settling. Maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't why I was scared. I was scared because everything felt connected. The knocking, the boots, the note, the figure in the hallway. None of it made sense by itself. Together, it felt like someone was playing a game. And I was the only one participating. The next morning, I finally reported everything to campus housing and security. They listened politely, took notes, asked a few questions, then gave me the kind of look people give when they think you're exaggerating. No cameras had captured anyone. No other students reported unusual activity. No evidence existed beyond a handwritten note that could have come from anybody. The investigation went nowhere. A week later, the knocking stopped. No more notes appeared. No more figures stood at the end of the hallway. Everything simply ended. Most people would probably find that comforting. I didn't. Because on the day I moved out at the end of the semester, I discovered something hidden beneath my bed. A pair of old black work boots. The same kind I'd seen in the bathroom stall. Covered in dust. Placed neatly side by side. As though someone had left them there for me to find. I never learned who put them there. I never learned who had been knocking. And years later, that's still what bothers me most. Not the things I saw, but the feeling that whoever was responsible could have been much closer than I ever realized. Maybe even inside the dorm the entire time. Watching, waiting, listening, and somehow always knowing when I was alone.